The Silent Race Begins story, the nuclear mirage, Mossad's war on Iran's atomic program. The year was 1988. The Iran-Iraq War had just ended, leaving both nations scarred, exhausted, and desperate to rebuild their strength. But beneath the surface of peace, another war was already beginning, one that would never be declared, yet would shape the future of the Middle East for decades. Inside a nondescript grey building on the outskirts of Tel Aviv, Mossad's senior officers gathered around a dimly lit conference table. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Stacks of intercepted documents lay scattered before them, letters, invoices, and coded telex messages recovered from trade networks in Europe. They all pointed toward one chilling possibility: Iran was quietly assembling the pieces of a nuclear program. The Mossad director, a man of calm authority and sharp intellect, placed a single photograph on the table. It showed a set of metallic cylinders, centrifuge components, the kind used to enrich uranium. He looked up at his officers and said in a low voice, "Gentlemen, this is not about power generation. This is about deterrence or dominance. We must find out which." From that moment, a new shadow operation was born. Project Mirage. Its mission: to uncover and, if necessary, sabotage Iran's secret nuclear ambitions before they could reach the point of no return. To the world, Israel remained silent. Diplomatically, nothing had changed, but within the hidden networks of intelligence, Mossad launched one of its most complex espionage campaigns since the 1970s. The first step was tracing the origins of suspicious shipments. Mossad SLAP Logistics Analysis Program began monitoring every export license issued in Europe that involved high-precision metalwork or vacuum technology. What they found startled even seasoned analysts. Small Swiss and German firms were selling medical centrifuge parts through a chain of shell companies in Turkey, Cyprus, and Dubai. But one company stood out: Helvetec Instruments AG of Zurich. On paper, it manufactured centrifuges for laboratory use. In reality, it was quietly supplying components for a project codenamed Greenfields, a front for Iran's nuclear research program. Agent Reuven Alon, a veteran field operative fluent in German and Farsi, was assigned to infiltrate Helvetec, his cover. An industrial systems consultant representing a European trade group. He arrived in Zurich under a new identity: Daniel Kruger, complete with a Swiss bank account, fake degrees, and a polished resume. Reuven's mission was not to steal documents, but to understand the network: who financed it, who ordered the parts, and where were they really going. Weeks passed. He attended business conferences, shared dinners with executives, and gradually earned the trust of Helvetec's senior engineer, Dr. Erich Müller. Over whiskey and quiet jazz in Zurich's Old Town, Müller spoke freely. He hinted that the real buyers were friends in the Middle East, working on long-term energy independence. Reuven smiled politely but took mental notes. Every conversation, every small clue was reported back through encrypted bursts to Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Mossad's analysis division cross-referenced Reuven's intel with satellite images over central Iran. There, in the desert near Isfahan, construction had begun on a facility that, according to Iranian statements, would research nuclear medicine. But the layout, with reinforced underground sections and multiple cooling towers, suggested something else entirely. By early 1990, Mossad had pieced together enough to brief Israel's prime minister. The conclusion was chilling. Iran has begun a clandestine nuclear project with civilian cover. Their suppliers operate in Europe and Asia without immediate disruption. Enrichment capability may be achieved within a decade. The directive was clear: disrupt, delay, deceive. Mossad created a small covert unit called Keshet 12 to handle the operations fieldwork. Its members included electronics specialists, logistics analysts, and cyber experts. Pioneers in an era before cyber warfare was even a known term. Their first strike came quietly. A shipment of specialized rotors leaving Hamburg for Dubai under the label medical pumps never reached its destination. Instead, it was replaced mid-transit with defective components, identical in appearance, but destined to fail after weeks of operation. When those rotors were finally installed in Iran's centrifuges, a chain reaction of mechanical failures followed. Technicians in Isfahan were baffled. Weeks of research led nowhere, and delays piled up. The Iranian program had lost 6 months, and no one outside knew why. In Zurich, however, Reuven's situation was growing tense. He had discovered internal memos linking Helvetech to a front company in Turkey named Alboraz Trading Ltd. The payments originated from Dubai, but the invoices used Swiss reference codes, a deliberate attempt to hide their real path. One rainy evening, as Reuven was about to leave his apartment, he noticed a shadow move across the street. He kept walking calmly, but instinctively changed his route to left turns, one stop at a cafe, and then down an alleyway. When he looked back, the shadow was gone. He didn't know if it was coincidence or counterintelligence. Back in Tel Aviv, Mossad analysts noticed something else. Iranian communications had changed tone. The words foreign interference appeared repeatedly in intercepted telexes. They suspected spies but had no proof, which was exactly what Mossad wanted. Still, it meant danger for Reuven. His cover was now fragile. Mossad arranged an extraction through Geneva under the pretext of a business conference. Within 48 hours, Daniel Kruger vanished from Zurich, leaving behind only a rented flat and a collection of empty wine bottles. The intelligence he brought back was priceless. The documents and coded invoices confirmed that Iran's procurement system relied on a vast global network: Europe for technology, Africa for raw materials, and Asia for finance. By 1991, Mossad had expanded its operations into this global network. Agents infiltrated trade expos, posed as engineers, and even created front companies that offered Iran alternative supplies. subtle traps designed to feed Tehran defective technology. Each mission had to look like an accident, a failed shipment, a miswired component, a software glitch. The artistry was in making the sabotage invisible, and yet the psychological war ran deeper. Mossad deliberately leaked hints of false intelligence through controlled channels, planting the idea that Iran's own suppliers were unreliable. Distrust began spreading among the program's scientists and financiers. One intercepted Iranian memo read, "We cannot rely on European intermediaries. Our systems keep failing. Either there is infiltration or God does not favor this project." By 1993, Israel's intelligence reports concluded that Iran's nuclear program was years behind schedule, slowed by confusion, mistrust, and mechanical breakdowns. Mossad's invisible war was working. But beneath that sense of victory, Meir Dogan, one of Mossad's senior planners, warned his team, "They will learn, they will adapt. Every time we strike, they evolve. The real war has just begun." And he was right. Deep within Iran's Revolutionary Guard, a new division was being formed. Unit 400, tasked with counter-espionage and foreign intelligence. Their first objective, find who was sabotaging their nuclear dream. The shadows on both sides were now moving. The game had entered a new, dangerous phase, one that would blur the lines between diplomacy, deception, and survival. Operation Ghost Trade. The rain fell steadily over Istanbul's docks, washing the streets clean, but hiding darker movements beneath the surface. Cargo containers shifted silently under floodlights, each one marked with names of obscure European companies. To the untrained eye, they were shipments of industrial valves and computer components. To Mossad, they were the veins of Iran's secret atomic network. By early 1994, Mossad's analysts had traced dozens of suspicious trade routes converging on Turkey and the United Arab Emirates. One route in particular stood out: a company named Ankara Systems, Ltd., registered to a post office box but handling millions in electronics exports. Its listed clients included educational institutes and hospitals. Yet the cargo manifests told another story, one filled with high-frequency switches, carbon fiber rotors, and vacuum seals. In Tel Aviv, inside the Caesarea operations wing of Mossad, a new subunit was assembled to strike deeper. Its codename, Ghost Trade. The task: penetrate and dismantle the international web supplying Iran's atomic ambitions without ever firing a bullet. Heading the unit was Yael Navon, one of Mossad's youngest field commanders, fluent in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. Known for her calm demeanor and analytical brilliance, Yael believed that to defeat a network, you must first become part of it. She arrived in Istanbul posing as Dr. Leila Hassan, a Lebanese logistics coordinator for a European procurement agency. Her cover identity was flawless, built with years of background material and digital footprints. Her first target: Ankara Systems. She began by befriending its operations manager, a middle-aged trader named Farid Kamali, whose ambition exceeded his caution. Over several business lunches, Yale offered opportunities to diversify his suppliers, hinting that her company could provide high-grade laboratory equipment without paperwork. Kamali took the bait. Within weeks, she had access to shipping records, invoice trails, and internal correspondence linking the company to a Dubai-based front called Al-Sahar Imports. Mossad's cyber team intercepted encrypted faxes showing coordination with Iranian entities under diplomatic protection. Each document Yale acquired was quietly transmitted to Tel Aviv through a hidden transmitter disguised as a compact mirror. Within weeks, Mossad had a map of an entire procurement network stretching from Europe to the Persian Gulf. But every successful infiltration has its cost. One night, while Yale was reviewing documents at her rented flat, she noticed a tiny reflection in the window, the glint of a camera lens. Without hesitation, she switched off the lights and moved toward the back exit. Outside, two men stood near a parked car, pretending to smoke. Their shoes were military-issue Iranian intelligence observers, likely from Unit 400. Yayel vanished into the narrow alleys of Karaki. Her route planned Mossad's Istanbul safe house, received her within minutes, and an emergency extraction was initiated. She had completed her mission, but Istanbul was no longer safe. Meanwhile, back in Tel Aviv, the data she gathered revealed something startling. The Iranian procurement operations weren't only about components, they were about knowledge. Iranian scientists were quietly enrolling in European universities, posing as engineering students and funneling research data back home. Mossad now faced a far greater challenge. This wasn't just about stopping shipments, it was about stopping ideas. To counter it, Mossad launched Operation Seferim Books, a silent academic front designed to mislead Iranian researchers by publishing false technical papers and infiltrating academic conferences. The goal: flood the information channels with convincing but flawed designs. It was psychological warfare on a new front. By 1995, Iran's technical progress had slowed again. Their designs failed. Equipment kept malfunctioning. Scientists argued, politicians blamed each other, and funds vanished. Mossad's fingerprints were nowhere to be found. In one intercepted Iranian communication, an official wrote, "Our centrifuges spin, but our dreams do not. Someone is feeding us illusions." In the shadow war of intelligence, that sentence was victory enough. Yet deep within Tehran, a name was whispered: Layla Hassan. Someone had survived her deception, and they were looking for her. The Iranians had started their own manhunt. Digital shadows. Operation Stuxnet. Welcome to Spyward Story. If you're watching right now, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from, and please subscribe to the channel for more true espionage documentaries brought to life. When sabotage moved from the loading dock into lines of code, A new kind of battlefield opened, one without borders, where bits could break machines and silence could be louder than an explosion. By the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, what began as targeted logistics disruption and clandestine procurement interference had evolved. Iran rebuilt, adapted, and dispersed procurement channels. Its technical teams innovated around faulty components. The physical delays had been effective, but they were slow and costly. Mossad and its partners concluded that a decisive surgical approach within the machinery itself could yield greater, faster results. That conclusion birthed a project unlike anything before it, a weapon written in software and deployed through the quiet veins of industrial control systems. The operation would become widely known much later as Stuxnet, a name that in the coming years would change the rules of war. The problem the intelligence planners faced was stark. Centrifuges at enrichment facilities like the one near Natanz were not ordinary computers. They were controlled by programmable logic controllers, industrial devices that regulated speed, temperature, and process sequencing. These PLCs interacted with human operators through supervisory systems but followed rigid instructions. A software-induced deviation that was subtle and intermittent could inflict mechanical strain over time without immediately betraying itself to the engineers. The objective, therefore, had to be surgical. Corrupt the control logic in ways that produced physical damage on Iranian centrifuges while masking evidence of interference for as long as possible. In Tel Aviv, a quiet team of cyber specialists, hardware engineers, and operational planners convened under code names and tight compartmentalization. Mossad's best minds worked alongside foreign technical partners who had decades of industrial control expertise. The proposal was audacious. Create a worm that could find specific Siemens controllers used in Iran's centrifuge polishing stations. Trick them into running sequences outside safe parameters, and do so intermittently to mimic random mechanical failure. The worm had to propagate stealthily through Windows systems that monitored the PLC's jump air-gapped networks where possible, and then remain dormant until it identified a precise target signature, the combination of PLC models, field variables, and centrifuge operation patterns. Indicative of a uranium enrichment cascade, designing such a digital weapon required a new language of tradecraft. Coders learned how to mimic human engineers, how diagnostic software logged errors, and how to camouflage malicious commands behind routine telemetry. They also built kill switches and safety's moral and operational constraints to prevent collateral damage to unrelated industrial plants. Meetings in safe rooms turned into marathon sessions where mathematicians argued with engineers and field officers, tried to translate technical paranoia into operational reality. Every line of code was reviewed under principle. Can this be detected? If so, how would the target interpret it? If not, could it still be controlled and, crucially, could it be turned off? A prototype was built and tested in controlled environments that simulated the Natanz facility down to the noise of its bearings. engineers fed the worm known signatures and watched as it propagated through emulated SCADA networks, injected malformed control sequences, and altered rotor speeds in ways that produced stress without immediate catastrophic failure. Weeks of runs revealed the worm's subtle genius. It could adjust rotor speeds by small margins at precise intervals, create resonance and thermal cycles that would produce microfractures in the centrifuge rotors, and then hide those anomalies inside the normal stream of diagnostic logs by replaying previously recorded legitimate telemetry. Politically and legally, the project sat in a grey centre. Senior advisors debated the ramifications of deploying a cyber weapon, the risk of global exposure, the chance of an unintended cascade elsewhere, and the ethical line of attacking physical systems through code. Operational commanders argued the alternative. A nuclear-ready Iran would change the strategic balance irreversibly. The decision to proceed was made with caveats. The operation would be controlled, narrow in scope, and continually reassessed. It would be a surgical deterrent, not an act of indiscriminate destruction. Deploying the worm required unconventional tradecraft. Iran's nuclear facilities were not fully networked to the Internet. Many critical control systems were air-gapped. The only practical vectors were the human elements, engineers, consultants, and removable media like USB drives that bridged the air gap. Field teams focused on the social terrain, contractors, foreign technicians, and equipment suppliers who rotated through the facilities. Mossad deployed agents and cultivated insiders who could deliver infected media, exploit trusted software updates, or use routine maintenance visits to seed contaminated laptops. Each insertion was designed to appear completely ordinary, a routine software upgrade. An engineering report on a USB key or a diagnostic tool handed to a technician. The first successful infiltration was not cinematic. It was patient, unglamorous, and required months of building plausible cover stories. A consultant, posing as a systems maintenance contractor, earned the trust of site technicians by providing benign utilities and legitimate updates. Once the consultant's removable media had passed through several machines, the worm's propagation code activated and began a quiet spread through engineering workstations. Over days and weeks, it matured, fingerprinting networked PLCs and identifying the specific configurations used in the enrichment cascades. When it detected the unique signature of the targeted centrifuge control architecture, the attack logic executed. The changes were subtle. Rotor speeds were intermittently nudged outside normal operational bands. Frequency patterns induced sympathetic vibrations, and prolonged microcycling caused fatigue in brittle rotor materials. Importantly, after each malicious event, the worm replayed stored, plausible, and previously recorded sensor outputs, making system logs appear consistent with normal operation. Technicians, seeing only plausible telemetry and intermittent mechanical failures, diagnose parts or procedures rather than consider covert electronic tampering. The result: repeated attrition of centrifuge rotors and prolonged downtime without immediate attribution. Successive waves of infection and tailored command sequences led over months to a pattern of anomalous failures and repairs that frustrated Iranian engineers and slowed enrichment progress. The program paid a cumulative price in replacement parts, time, and lost confidence. Yet the Operation S architects knew that a digital weapon that changed physical reality also carried the risk of exposure. When components behaved unpredictably in industrial facilities elsewhere in the world, unexplained failures raised questions in non-target countries that investigated domestic infrastructure anomalies and discovered malicious code similar in structure. Those discoveries would eventually leak into public discussion, changing the rules of engagement for cyber operations globally. But in the early stages, the secrecy held. Within Tehran, confusion grew. Engineers blamed manufacturing defects, foreign sabotage, and internal incompetence in turn. Security services responded by tightening protocols and forming counter-cyber units. Iran's nascent cyber capabilities, backed by state resources, began earnest analysis of every failure mode. They upgraded monitoring, instituted hardware checks, and altered procedures. Still, the worm's ability to mask itself and to exploit trusted interactions delayed clear attribution. Only later did analysts outside the theater begin to identify a distinctive pattern, an advanced worm that specifically targeted Siemens PLCs and exploited previously unknown zero-day vulnerabilities to spread. Back in Mossad's operational rooms, analysts tracked the effect: reduced enrichment rates, increased maintenance cycles, and rising internal frustration in the Iranian program. The success was measured not just in broken rotors, but in time bought for diplomatic efforts and in the slowing of a path toward potential weapons capability. Yet triumph was tempered by new realities. The world was waking to the fact that software could now manifest as physical harm, and once unleashed, such tools might be repurposed by other actors with less restraint. Ethically, Operation Stuxnet sparked furious internal debate inside intelligence circles. Proponents argued it was a proportionate response to a covert existential threat. Critics warned of precedent and the normalization of cyber-enabled sabotage. The operation's architects, however, had designed the code with surgical constraints and built-in triggers to limit collateral damage. They had also prepared contingency plans, diplomatic cover stories, plausible deniability channels, and methods for extracting or adjusting the attack if detection risk grew too high. As months turned into years, Stuxnet's impact became part of a larger mosaic of covert action, procurement, disruption, academic misinformation, human intelligence, and kinetic pressure where necessary. The worm did not end Iran's program, but it materially delayed critical milestones and forced Tehran to devote resources to defensive measures it could ill afford. Each tactic added to an aggregate effect, time bought for the region and space for political solutions to be pursued. The operation also rewired the landscape of global conflict. Once the existence of such a weapon was exposed in technical circles, it inspired other states and non-state actors to consider cyber tools as strategic weapons. The tone of international debate shifted. Treaties and norms were discussed in academic halls and diplomatic rooms, and frameworks for responsible state behavior in cyberspace were proposed. In field-safe houses and secure data centers, the people who had written, tested, and deployed Stuxnet rarely spoke of it publicly. Their work became a case study in the emerging art of cyber interdiction, a story of skill, restraint, and the fraught ethics of modern espionage. For Mossad, it was a lesson in adaptability. The battlefield was no longer bounded by front lines and borders. It was threaded through servers, removable media, and the human trust that connected engineers to machines. Midway through an intelligence cycle, a brief message flashed on an internal console, operational effect confirmed. Natanz rates reduced. The room exhaled, then returned to work. The war of shadows moved forward. The scientists list welcome to Spyward's story. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true espionage documentaries filled with secrets, suspense, and real intelligence history. In the aftermath of Operation Stuxnet, the war between Mossad and Iran moved from circuits to streets, from invisible code to living, breathing targets. Iran's nuclear program, though wounded, was not broken. Centrifuges could be replaced. Computers could be rebuilt. But the real core of the program, the minds that designed it, were irreplaceable. And so began one of the most controversial and chilling chapters of modern espionage. The scientists' list. The decision was made in silent rooms far away from the public eye. Intelligence reports revealed that despite digital disruptions, several key scientists continued pushing the Iranian nuclear effort forward. Their research teams had managed to stabilize enrichment after the chaos of Stuxnet. Tehran publicly announced resilience, projecting confidence. But behind closed doors, panic and suspicion ruled. Mossad's leadership realized that Iran's progress depended on just a handful of specialists. Remove them and the machinery would stop, not because it was destroyed, but because no one would know how to fix it. The first names were marked on the list, a quiet, typed document stored in encrypted archives. Each name represented not just a person, but a pillar of Iran's nuclear future. Intelligence from assets inside Tehran intercepted communications, and years of surveillance painted a detailed picture: addresses, routines, vehicles, family connections. Mossad's analysts pieced together lives, one ordinary detail at a time, until patterns emerged: routes to work, coffee breaks, weekly lectures, moments when the targets were most vulnerable. At the center of the list was Dr. Masoud Ali Mohammadi, a respected physicist and professor known for his theoretical work. Publicly, he wasn't directly tied to uranium enrichment. But behind the scenes, he advised engineers at the University of Tehran on particle behavior models later applied to nuclear research. He was the first to fall one winter morning as he left his home in northern Tehran. A motorbike waited at the corner. The rider wore a black helmet, face shielded, hands gloved. As Mohammadi approached his car, a small package attached beneath the vehicle's frame detonated, triggered remotely. The blast echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Witnesses saw smoke and chaos, but no attacker. The operation was over in seconds. Iranian state TV blamed foreign elements. International media speculated Mossad's hand. Within intelligence circles, the strike was seen as a message. The first cut on the scientists' list had been made. The next months turned darker. Tehran streets, once buzzing with confidence, began to feel the weight of fear. Another name on the list, Dr. Majid Shahriari, a nuclear engineer who had worked on enrichment cascade algorithms. Late one morning, as he drove through traffic, two men on motorcycles approached from either side. One slapped a magnetic device onto the car's door and sped away. Within moments, the explosion shattered glass and steel. Shahriari was gone. Simultaneously, in a different district, another scientist, Dr. Feridun Abbasi Dafani, survived a nearly identical attack. His wife's quick reaction and a mistimed detonation saved them. Abbasi escaped with minor injuries, immediately realizing what had happened. The attackers, disguised as ordinary riders, vanished into Tehran's traffic. Abbasi would later rise to head Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, a symbol of defiance, but also a constant reminder of the shadow war waged against him. Inside Mossad headquarters, every success came with unease. The scientist neutralization project was never about revenge. It was about slowing time, buying years for diplomacy, and preventing a potential nuclear breakout. But each hit brought international scrutiny. News agencies began connecting the dots. Foreign governments condemned the killings, and inside Israel, debates erupted. Some officers questioned the ethics of such missions. Yet others insisted every life saved by delay was worth the moral weight. For field agents, morality was a luxury. Precision and silence were the only currencies that mattered. Operatives were trained to vanish without a trace, using tradecraft honed over decades. Motorcycles, magnetic bombs, silent pistols, and distraction routes mapped down to the second. Every move rehearsed in replicas of Tehran streets built in secret compounds outside Tel Aviv. Their mission briefings were mechanical, no emotion, no hesitation, no mistakes. Meanwhile, in Tehran, paranoia reached new heights. Security services launched vast counterintelligence sweeps. University departments were monitored. Dozens of engineers were interrogated. Some were imprisoned on suspicion of leaking information. Others fled the country, fearing for their lives. Cameras were installed at every gate. Convoys replaced personal cars for senior scientists. Still, the attacks continued, as if Mossad's reach defied every layer of defense. One of the most complex operations came in 2012. A scientist involved in advanced centrifuge calibration left his home at dawn. His driver started the car unaware that something metallic clung beneath it. The explosion tore through the morning calm, killing the scientist instantly. Tehran accused Israel and Western intelligence agencies of orchestrating an assassination campaign. Mossad, as always, neither confirmed nor denied it. Each event was followed by silence, an absence of claims, no names, no traces. But among Iran's intelligence community, a realization grew. Someone inside was feeding precise information that led to another shadow war, the hunt for moles. Counterintelligence operatives launched investigations, scouring for leaks. One mid-level engineer disappeared after questioning. Another was found dead, officially ruled a suicide. The air in scientific institutions became thick with distrust. Mossad's success, however, came at a cost. Internationally, human rights groups condemned the killings. Diplomatic allies distanced themselves. Yet within Israel's security establishment, the results were undeniable. Iran's nuclear progress slowed, its technical teams fragmented, and its brightest minds feared the morning commute. The list, once 10 names long, had gradually been crossed out, one by one. Not every target was eliminated. Some went into hiding, some defected, and some changed professions altogether. But the psychological impact was irreversible. The Iranian leadership tightened its grip on the program, adding layers of secrecy, yet that very secrecy made collaboration harder, slowing everything further. In the darkened control rooms of Mossad, analysts monitored satellite feeds, intercepted communications, and coded new contingency plans. Every mission report was filed with a simple, cryptic note: objective neutralized. Chain reaction contained. By 2013, Tehran's scientific community was exhausted. The country publicly vowed revenge, but internally they struggled to rebuild morale. The world's intelligence agencies watched in awe and unease. The silent assassins of Mossad had changed the rhythm of the nuclear race, and somewhere, locked in an archive deep within Tel Aviv, the original scientists' list lay inside a sealed folder, now mostly crossed out, except for a few remaining names. The ones who had vanished before anyone could find them. You're watching Spy Ward Story. If you're enjoying these deep dives into real intelligence history, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. The next chapter will take you into the heart of Iran's counterintelligence response.
Tehran's counterattack. Welcome to Spy Ward Story. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from. And if you love true stories of intelligence, courage, and deception, make sure to subscribe, because this part will take you deep into the heart of Tehran, where the hunters became the hunted. The year was 2013. For almost a decade, Mossad had operated in the shadows of Tehran, executing one of the most secretive and surgical intelligence campaigns in modern history. But now the air had changed. The fear that once belonged to Iran's scientists had shifted. It now belonged to Mossad's operatives. Iran's counterintelligence, known as Etalat, had learned from every strike. Every blast, every disappearance, every pattern was mapped, reconstructed, and analyzed. For years, Mossad agents had moved through Tehran as ghosts, invisible, untouchable. But now the ghosts were being hunted. It began with whispers, Surveillance teams reported unidentified cars following suspected safe houses. Communications lines that were once secure began showing interference. A courier who handled encrypted flash drives vanished while traveling between Mashhad and Tehran. His body was never found. Mossad's Tehran cell chief, codenamed Uriel, sent a terse message to headquarters. Local grid compromised. Too much light in the dark. In response, Tel Aviv ordered immediate lockdown protocols. Agents changed apartments, burned cover identities, and cut contact with local informants. But the walls were already closing in. Unknown to Mossad, Iran's intelligence service had penetrated a small logistics network, not Mossad directly, but a contractor that provided fake passports and courier routes through Turkey and Azerbaijan. It was enough to trace patterns. Within weeks, Tehran's counterintelligence had mapped several entry and exit routes used by Israeli field teams. The turning point came in early 2014. A Mossad operative using the alias David Levy, a logistics handler stationed in Baku, was captured while crossing into northern Iran. He carried false passports, microfilm maps, and an encrypted satellite phone. The Iranian media never reported the arrest, but behind closed doors, interrogations began immediately. Iranian interrogators trained in psychological warfare didn't torture him physically. They used illusion. They played recordings of his supposed colleagues confessing. They manipulated time, changing light cycles, blurring day and night until his resistance broke. After weeks of silence, Levi revealed details, not names, but routines, drop points, and timing patterns. That was all Tehran needed. Within months, raids began. Apartments that had once been safe houses were stormed. Hidden rooms, burner phones, coded ledgers, everything was seized. Some operatives vanished before the strikes, slipping across borders through smuggling routes. Others weren't so lucky. Tehran called it the Great Counterattack. For Mossad, it was the Black Season. One of the most critical losses occurred in Shiraz, where an Iranian-born asset, codenamed Phoenix, who had been transmitting intelligence from within a nuclear materials plant, was caught while sending coded data through a hidden channel embedded in a university's research paper submission system. It was a masterpiece of digital disguise until a cyber forensics team stumbled upon the anomaly. Phoenix disappeared. His family received a letter weeks later. He confessed and was forgiven. No one ever saw him again. For Mossad, every name lost was more than an operative. It was a piece of their unseen world collapsing. Mir Dogan's successors at Mossad knew what was happening. The balance had shifted. For years, Mossad had dictated the tempo. Now Tehran was in control. In the underground interrogation chambers of Evin prison, Iranian officers pieced together fragments, partial codes, faces from CCTV, fragments of phone metadata. Each discovery led to another door. By mid-2015, Tehran announced it had dismantled an extensive foreign spy network. Officially, few believed the claim. But within the intelligence community, the alarm was real. Mossad had taken a hit, one of the worst in its modern history. In Tel Aviv, emergency meetings followed. Counterintelligence units reviewed all ongoing operations. Sleeper cells were told to cut ties, dead drop sites were decommissioned, and field channels went silent. A Mossad directive known as Protocol Shadow Zero was activated. Every foreign operative connected to Iran or neighboring regions went dark. No contact, no movement, no trace. But even in retreat, Mossad wasn't broken. They adapted. A small team within the Keshet division, Mossad's elite counterintelligence unit, launched a parallel operation, not to strike back, but to erase traces. They hacked databases, planted false leads, and even staged fake spy arrests in neighboring countries to confuse Tehran's investigators. One such decoy mission unfolded in Istanbul, where Turkish police announced the arrest of a supposed Israeli spy ring. In truth, it was a carefully orchestrated smokescreen, Mossad's own phantom operation designed to make Tehran chase shadows. But the real danger was internal. Mossad suspected a breach. Someone, somewhere within its extended network, had tipped Iran off. Suspicion turned inward. An internal investigation, codenamed Project Dustline, began, a forensic audit of years of intelligence flows. Dozens of analysts were quietly questioned. No one was ever officially blamed, but the findings were chilling. Mossad's enemy wasn't just Iran's intelligence, it was overconfidence. While both sides fought invisible wars, the global stage was changing. Negotiations between Iran and world powers were underway, leading to the 2015 nuclear agreement. For the first time, Mossad was ordered not to act, to stand down and observe. But in the silence of restraint, fear grew deeper. Tehran was using the calm to rebuild. On the streets of Tehran, fear began to turn into pride. Billboards praised the intelligence service for defending the nation from foreign assassins. Agents, who once moved unseen, now faced a nation alert to their existence. Every suspicious foreigner was watched. Every local contact questioned. Mossad's invisible empire in Iran had collapsed, and rebuilding it would take years. But in Tel Aviv's darkened control room, the Director General said something quietly to his aides. Let them celebrate. The game never ends. It just changes the board. And indeed, even as Tehran declared victory, a new kind of Mossad operation was being born, one that wouldn't rely on bombs or agents in the field, but on information, manipulation, and cyber shadows. The next war would not be fought in alleys or laboratories. It would be fought in minds.
The War of Minds. Welcome to Spyward Story. If you're watching now, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And make sure to subscribe, because this chapter turns from broken machines and ghost shipments to the quietest, deadliest front of all, influence. When physical sabotage and targeted killings slowed Iran's nuclear timetable, a new battlefield opened almost by necessity, not of steel and circuit boards, but of perception. Governments call it information operations. Psychiatrists call it mass suggestion, and spies simply call it the War of Minds. For Mossad, after years of attrition operations and cyber interdictions, the strategic imperative became clear. If you cannot fully destroy an adversary's capability, you must change the adversary's decisions. If you cannot make them lose their hardware, make them lose their cohesion, their trust, their will. The toolbox for this war was diverse and unromantic. It combined old-school tradecraft, forged documents, infiltrated press conferences, and planted human sources with new tools. Social media manipulation, covert funding of sympathetic academics, anonymous leaks of compromised correspondence, and the stealthy use of proxy news outlets. The objective was subtle and surgical: create doubt inside Tehran's inner circles, amplify rivalries, and force defensive overreach that would consume time and resources. Mossad's Psychological Operations Cell, an interagency group formed at the end of the Stuxnet campaign, convened a new campaign plan. Its architects sketched maps of influence, identifying not only scientists and generals but the advisors who whispered in their ears, university rectors, procurement middlemen, foreign advisors with suspected loyalties, and diaspora activists who could be nudged into unwitting complicity. Each node became a lever to tug. One of the earliest initiatives targeted information flows into academic conferences. Iranian scientists relied on peer networks and Western journals for updates and validation. Mossad operatives anonymously submitted carefully constructed papers and conference presentations containing plausible but subtly flawed technical hypotheses. These false threads, when picked up by less skeptical domestic researchers, seeded research paths that were costly and time-consuming. The effect was both technical and cultural. Iranian teams chased dead-ends while internal blame shifted between departments. At the same time, a coordinated media campaign began. In friendly foreign outlets, investigative pieces surfaced about suspicious procurement chains and corrupt procurement officials. In social platforms frequented by Iranian professionals, rumors about scholarship offers and travel grants seeded distrust. Anonymous whistleblower accounts hinted at a mole inside the Atomic Energy Organization. The goal was never to fabricate an obvious scandal, bright lies collapse quickly, but to amplify whispers into institutional paranoia. Public diplomacy played a parallel role. Through back channels in Europe, Mossad-fed intelligence suggested that certain Iranian projects were under foreign scrutiny, nudging neutral suppliers to demand additional oversight. Banks warned quietly about compliance risks, tightened payment channels. The cumulative effect choked the small arteries the program needed, while Tehran's leadership blamed incompetence, betrayal, or worse, treachery within. Another strand of the operation targeted morale. Mossad had long known that the Iranian program thrived on personal networks, professors mentoring students, engineers sharing hands-on techniques, technicians passing tricks learned on the shop floor. Disrupting that social fabric had strategic value. Agents cultivated trusted acquaintances who would introduce doubts into conversations. Did you see the new audit? Who signed that export? Why does this foreign advisor never meet the ministry? Over time, such conversational seeds spread. Colleagues stopped sharing notes, teams mistrusted each other, and collaboration diminished at the margin enough to slow timelines. Psychological pressure was also applied through show trials and public claims. Quiet leaks flattered certain conservative factions in Tehran by revealing documents that suggested foreign collusion by rival political groups. The intent was to force internal purges and reassignments that would divert attention from the nuclear effort. In several cases, entire research divisions were reorganized under tighter security, increasing secrecy but also making routine collaboration less efficient. One of the campaign's more delicate maneuvers involved diaspora channels. Mossad-supported actors in Europe and North America amplified criticism of procurement intermediaries and, through a network of NGOs, pushed for export controls and corporate audits. That legal pressure translated into delayed shipments and cancelled contracts. In boardrooms in Zurich, Hamburg, and Istanbul, once friendly suppliers reconsidered the reputational risk of dealing with Tehran. In parallel, the cyber teams did a different kind of mental warfare, selective disclosures, carefully curated leaks to Western security researchers revealed technical anomalies within Iranian facilities, prompting public analyses that painted Tehran as unreliable and secretive. Those public reports were then fed back into Iranian internal channels, where commanders read them and suspected external sabotage. The external analysis created internal self-doubt, an identity problem for a regime that claimed technological sovereignty. All the while, Iran adapted. Their counter-propagandists learned to flood social networks with benign technical papers, create distraction topics, and denounce foreign reports as fabrications. The Revolutionary Guards invested heavily in internal morale building, lavish awards ceremonies, controlled media narratives, and honors for loyal scientists. Yet these measures, while boosting public face, did not eliminate the private fractures sown by months of well-constructed doubt. One human story stands out in the files. Nadia, a mid-level procurement coordinator at a small state-affiliated company. She had been quietly approached by an asset posing as a foreign compliance consultant. The asset provided plausible legal frameworks, trustworthy vendors, and a software package said to streamline customs clearance. After months of whispered advice and friendly meetings, Nadia submitted procurement suggestions that forced her division to alter its suppliers. When the program faltered, her superiors suspected betrayal. Nadia lost her job, fled the country, and later surfaced as a source for Western journalists. Her fate illustrates both the moral cost and strategic efficacy of targeting human nodes. Mossad's own analysts were not blind to the ethical cost. The war of minds inhabited an ambiguous moral space, influencing public opinion, manipulating careers, and exploiting personal trust. The planners argued it was necessary given the stakes, the prevention of irrevocable regional escalation, yet debates persisted. In classified meeting transcripts, some officers insisted on narrow targeting and proportionality. Others pushed for broader campaigns to maximize delay. These arguments informed every operation. Calibrate the pressure so that it disables, not destroys. Fragment networks rather than annihilate them to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Internationally, the campaign produced contradictions. Some Western intelligence partners welcomed the soft power pressure that brought diplomatic leeway. Others worried that manipulation of academic and media spaces set dangerous precedents for free inquiry. Human rights groups protested detentions that followed from the paranoia Mossad's campaigns fomented. The public record contained the pain of careers interrupted and lives appended. The private record logged months of gained time and missed milestones in Tehran's program. By the mid-2010s, the cumulative effect of procurement sabotage, Stuxnet's technical strike, targeted removals, and the war of minds had altered Iran's trajectory. Enrichment progress was delayed, projects multiplied in secrecy, and internal costs rose. But the victory was not absolute. Mossad's planners recorded the lesson and filed it away. If you want to protect a nation in the 21st century, you must master not just explosives or code, but the subtle art of influence. Success in that domain buys time, and in geopolitics, time is often life. Welcome to Spyward Story. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because this is the final chapter of a shadow war that spanned continents, crossed digital and moral frontiers, and left behind more questions than answers. When the War of Minds reached its peak, Mossad had achieved what most intelligence services could only dream of. Iran's nuclear program was delayed, fragmented, and tangled in its own doubts. But intelligence victories, like mirages in the desert, can fade the moment you reach them. Behind every disrupted centrifuge and every silenced scientist lay a deeper, more haunting truth. The dream itself had not died. By the mid-2010s, Iran began quietly rebuilding. The international stage had shifted. New agreements, sanctions, and diplomatic negotiations gave Tehran a chance to regroup under legitimate cover. Mossad's networks, once confident, now faced a more cautious adversary. Cyber operations became riskier, field missions more tightly watched. The agency's analysts called it the shadow recoil, when a long-hidden enemy learns your methods and begins to mirror them. Inside Tel Aviv's intelligence headquarters, the post-operation reviews were grim yet reflective. Stuxnet had changed the history of cyber warfare. Assassinations had changed the ethics of intelligence. Disinformation had changed global trust. But had it changed Iran's resolve? The answer, whispered in closed rooms, was no. Iran's ambition had evolved, not ended. The final years of the campaign were marked by silent retreats. Safe houses in Baku, Yerevan, and Istanbul were emptied. Agents under diplomatic cover were recalled. Some double agents went dark, some switched sides, and others simply vanished. Mossad's chief of operations issued a classified memo titled Ghost Protocols, an order to erase footprints before history could trace them back. In the world of espionage, survival often meant disappearance. Meanwhile, in Tehran, a new generation of scientists emerged, those who had grown up watching colleagues die and projects collapse. They built their research under new layers of secrecy, compartmentalized even from each other. No more public collaborations, no more international conferences, only whispers and encrypted files. Ironically, Mossad's pressure had forced them to become more efficient in their concealment. In 2018, a stunning operation shook the intelligence world again. Mossad's theft of Iran's nuclear archive from a hidden warehouse in Tehran. It was a daring, cinematic raid, midnight trucks, forged documents, and a narrow escape across the border. When Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly unveiled those files, the message was clear. We still see everything. But within Mossad's inner circle, that triumph was bittersweet. Because those same files confirmed a paradox. Despite years of sabotage and subterfuge, Iran's nuclear knowledge was intact, preserved, hidden, waiting. For Mossad veterans, the lesson was philosophical. They had spent decades dismantling infrastructure, deceiving minds, and manipulating narratives. Yet the human desire for power, pride, and protection had endured. Intelligence work, they realized, could only delay destiny, not erase it. In secret debriefings, some officers admitted exhaustion. The endless cycle of covert actions and counteractions had blurred the lines between defense and obsession. One retired agent put it simply, "We learned how to stop a machine, but not how to stop a belief, beyond the operations." The geopolitical landscape was shifting again. New powers entered the Middle East equation: Russia, China, and regional alliances with their own covert networks. Mossad found itself navigating a web of overlapping interests, where friends and foes often changed places overnight. The nuclear threat was no longer a single facility, but an idea replicated across borders, minds, and technologies. Back home, public recognition was almost non-existent. The missions that defined this shadow war remained classified, and those who carried them out faded into bureaucratic anonymity. In a quiet Tel Aviv cemetery, rows of unmarked graves held the remains of agents who had never existed on paper. Their victories were invisible, their losses unspoken. Yet the ripples of their actions reshaped modern espionage forever. By the early 2020s, Mossad's analysts compiled the final impact report. It concluded that Iran's nuclear timeline had been delayed by more than a decade, not by diplomacy alone, but through an intricate web of espionage, sabotage, and psychological manipulation. The report's closing line was both proud and haunting. "We bought time, and sometimes time is all that history allows." And yet the mirage persisted. In remote desert facilities, centrifuges still spun. Scientists still dreamed. The world, tired of shadows, moved on, unaware that beneath the illusion of calm, the quiet race had resumed. As the dust settled over a generation of secret wars, Mossad's legacy became a paradox: admired, feared, and morally debated. They had shown the world that intelligence was not just about secrets, but about shaping reality itself. And in doing so, they had entered a realm where truth, deception, and survival were indistinguishable. The mirage of control had faded, but the shadow it cast, that unseen contest of minds and machines, still lingered over the horizon. This story is now complete. Witness how the world's most secretive agency fought an invisible war and what it truly cost on both sides. Disclaimer. This story is a cinematic documentary presentation based on publicly available historical information and verified intelligence reports. Some scenes and dialogues have been dramatized for storytelling clarity. Spyward Story does not endorse or condemn any nation, organization, or policy. Its purpose is purely informational, educational, and narrative.